We're going to look at the fourth story in God's great salvation story that we're dealing with. We could obviously deal with more. In biblical theology, it's really important to recognize that the Bible itself, both Old Testament and New Testament, specifically point out particular stories as being key stories. Now, the Joseph story is a key story. Most of, a good portion, not most of, but a good portion of Genesis is devoted to the Joseph story. And if it weren't important, it would just be like, half a chapter, like so many other stories in Genesis. But it's not. It's a whole big, I don't know, 12 chapters, or I don't even count it. But it's a lot of chapters. That tells you that it's important. In the same way, the story we're going to look at today, which is I Am Who I Am, is an incredibly important story. And the reason it is so important, we know it's important because it's continually referenced in the Zabur. It's continually referenced all through the Old Testament. You'll see it in the prophets. You see it in the Psalms. You'll see it mentioned even in the history when they go back and talk about what had happened. And it's also mentioned in the New Testament. So the reason why it's important to notice this is the Bible itself is the most important commentary on this salvation story. And this is clearly the key moment in the history of Israel. Now, there's something that you may never have thought about before. Joseph wanted the Hebrews to live in the land of Goshen because it was rich in farmland and excellent for sheep and cattle. And it's good to remember, because we wouldn't think about this, that there were only 72 of them. We're talking about a tiny population of people. They're shepherds. They have a lot of animals, but there are only 72 of them. And so there's plenty of room in this land of Goshen. So if you take the whole city of Lahore, its whole legal limits, that's the size of the land of Goshen. You can fit a lot of people on a land that size. The land would support them as well because it's farming land and it's good pasture land. And you can see the rivers that are going through it, Blues rivers. And there's Lahore. So it's the same size. So the land was perfect for grazing and farming. So that's important for us to get. This is a land that's going to support a lot of people. And they grew very quickly to be a large population. And they actually just filled the land. There were just so many people. They just filled the land with their people. And keep in mind, it was their own area, not an area that the Egyptians were interested in. And so the Egyptians just kind of let them be, let them do their own thing of farming, let them do their own thing of shepherding and cattle raising. And the Egyptians were like, well, that's fine, that's them. But as time went on, Joseph and his brothers died, as did the Pharaoh, and a new king who had not known Joseph came to power. So you know the story. So in this story, he's dealing with the fact that there are so many of them. He's worried that they might actually turn against them if Egypt was invaded by a foreign country. So they turned them into slaves. Now, something that you would never have thought about, maybe, but it's something that's important to recognize. They could not have multiplied like this in Canaan. You call it Canaan. I call it Canaan because I'm from the US. They couldn't have multiplied like this in Canaan. They went from 72 people up to 2.5 million people. That's possible in a place where nobody cares and there's lots of farmland, lots of food. That's not a problem at all. But it would not have been possible in Canaan because in Canaan, they would have been surrounded by enemies who would have attacked them. Hold it a second. Now, we never would have thought about this, but if they'd been in the land of Canaan, and I'm going to always call it Canaan, it's Canaan in Pakistan, but I just do. That's the way we were brought up. Um, if they'd been in Canaan, that's where they'd come from. They'd been in Canaan. But if they'd stayed there, they never would have turned into a population of 2.5 million people, because they were already surrounded by all these different ethnic groups and all of these tribes and all of these cities and all of these armies. And those natural enemies would have kept their population down. They wouldn't have allowed them to do it. But they're all by themselves in Goshen. They're all by themselves there. And so they can multiply, and nobody's going to stop them because they're supplying their own food. They're farming, and they are shepherding, and they are watching cattle. So you see, they could grow into a large population, which is important because God is giving them the land of Canaan. They're going to go back into Canaan. And the way they're going to get back there is by invading it as a population of 2.5 million people, not as 72 people. So that's what's going on here. The new Pharaoh's idea is to make these Hebrews into slaves. This is completely different from what Joseph ever expected. But I also want to point out that it sounds like they were worshiping idols by this point. When you read the commentary in the Psalms and in the prophets and the Psalms just inform us that the people were actually worshiping idols during these years, and that the reason they became slaves from their point of view was, well, from Pharaoh's point of view, was to keep them under control. But for the Hebrews' point of view, God was disciplining them for becoming idol worshippers. Even during this time, God was fulfilling his promise to Abraham. He's making them a great nation. Finally, the king issued a command: take every newborn Hebrew boy, throw him into the Nile, but let all the girls live. And so he realizes they have too many men. These men can become dangerous to them. These men are going to side with their enemies when their enemies invade. And so his solution is, well, just kill all the baby boys, every newborn boy, and there will be a whole generation where they just don't have any. I don't know. I guess they were intending that the women would all be slaves or wives. I'm not really sure. And so Moses is born. You know that story. The Pharaoh's daughter notices Moses, and this is important. She takes the baby, and Pharaoh's daughter says, you know, I want this to be my baby. Miriam comes in. Miriam brings Moses' mother into the story. Moses' mother raises the boy for the first 2 or 3 years, and then they bring the boy back to Pharaoh's daughter. Now, here's what's so important in this. It sounds like God has figured out this brilliant plan. It sounds like the brilliant plan is that the Hebrews are going to have an advocate. That advocate's going to be this Hebrew who is brought up in the house of the king. And one place in scripture says that he's a prince. And so he's not just, like a Hebrew living in the house. He actually becomes a prince of Egypt. And that's interesting, isn't it? Sounds like we've got a deliverer. And it sounds like God has the perfect plan, and we've got a political solution to the problem of God's, or not of God's, but of Pharaoh's destruction of the people. Because Moses is in there. Moses is a Hebrew. Moses is going to influence Pharaoh. That's not what happens. Because God hadn't promised the land of Egypt, hadn't promised them the land of Goshen. God had promised them the land of Canaan. And so God's plan was also, this is very important, God also had a part of his plan. He's punishing the Egyptians for enslaving the Hebrews and killing their baby boys. Even though at the same exact time, God is also punishing the Hebrews for worshiping idols. He's doing both. It's extremely important that we recognize that the commentary that we have in the Psalms and in the prophets who tell us about why these things happen. And when you read through and you find those little portions of the prophets and the Psalms where they talk, well, there's lots of portions. They talk about the Exodus and they talk about Moses and everything. You discover, well, the reason why they were slaves, from God's perspective, was God was punishing them. He was disciplining them. So at the same exact time, God was going to punish the Egyptians for doing the enslaving and doing the killing of the baby boys. So it's so interesting that what we have here is theological explanation. In other words, the theology of the prophets and the Psalms explain the story to us that God can use the evil actions of humans to accomplish a greater good. This is the same in the story with Joseph, where you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So now we're seeing a theological principle. Keep this in mind. The salvation story that we're dealing with is a salvation story that gives us theology which explains why and how God works. And that's a part of it. But it's not in us reading the story and putting our interpretation into the story. Not at all. It's when the scriptures themselves give us an interpretation, such as Joseph saying, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Or the Zabur saying that the people were worshiping idols and God punished them. Okay? And also remember that God's plan was also to punish the Canaanites. And his plan is there's so many different parts to the same plan. And we know this because God told Abraham that he was going to judge the Canaanites. But it wasn't time yet. There's going to need to be 400 years. And after 400 years, he was going to send the Israelites to punish the Canaanites. So put all of this together, and we have this commentary, either in the words of the story, as in the case of Abraham, or in the prophets and the Psalms. And the commentary helps us to understand the story. It's not you figuring the story out. It's you finding what the Bible itself, in other places, or even in the story itself, like with Joseph's comment and with God speaking that to Abraham, but finding what the scriptures themselves say about it. The commentary gives us the meaning behind it. In this case, a part of it was these Hebrews needed to be a large enough nation, 2.5 million, to punish the Canaanites for their sin. And of course, God's plan is to teach the Hebrews to trust him, Moses and the people. Now, Moses didn't know God's plan. Moses thought he could deliver his people from oppression. And I hope you'll notice here that Moses is stabbing that poor guy. That guy doesn't look happy at all. It's because he's dying. It's because Moses has killed him, and Moses killed him because he's the prince of Egypt. And he's delivering his people. I don't think he had a plan. I think he did it out of anger, and it was sin, but God used it. And he thought his own people would understand that God was going to use him to set them free, but they did not understand. Here we go. This is commentary from Stephen's speech. The commentary tells us about why this happened. Isn't that amazing? Now, you could just, when you preach your sermons, so often we just make it up. We say, well, this is why you did this. We don't know that. We just make it up. And we don't feel embarrassed about that. We should. We should be ashamed when we make up these motives and read into people. But the scriptures tell us why he did it. And maybe he did have a plan. Maybe this was actually a carefully thought out plan. I think that it was possible for him to think that they would understand that God was going to use him to set them free without saying, oh, I'm going to organize armies and they're going to oppose Pharaoh, which would never happen. So we have someone who seems like he's a perfect deliverer with political influence, but he ends up failing. He committed foolish murder. He's not accepted by the people he's trying to save. He's a coward and he ran away in fear. He's a complete and total failure in every way. How interesting that this is happening again, because it happened with Joseph. Here's Joseph, the favorite son. He's been given the birthright. It says that the story says he's been given the birthright. So he is now all of the privileges of the oldest son. He's wearing that coat everywhere he goes, the multicolored robe, and everything is just fine and perfect for Joseph. He's 17 years old. He's just on the top of the world. And then God brings him down to the bottom of the world as a slave. And then he brings him down even further than that by being someone accused of attempting to rape his mistress, his master's wife. Oh my gosh. And then he spends all of those years in prison. Like, oh my word, what is going on? Why? How can God allow this to happen? He has to be humbled. Moses has to be humbled. Isn't that interesting? Think about it. David too, same thing. David's got the same thing. He runs and hides. First, he's at the top of the world. He kills Goliath, and then he leads Saul's troops, and he conquers a lot more armies than Saul conquers. And the people say that Saul's got his thousands, but David's got his 10,000s. And it looks like David's on top of the world. And then he spends like 15 years running from Saul. And that's interesting. He's hiding in caves. And so God, it seems to be a pattern here. And this pattern is often explained as we read the whole text of the Bible. So Moses, the failure, got as far away from Pharaoh as he possibly could. He goes about 455 kilometers from Egypt, and probably took him a month or more to get there. He had to go through desert, like real desert. There in Midian, he meets Jethro. He marries Jethro's daughter, and he ends up becoming a shepherd in the wilderness. Prince of Egypt, perfect opportunity. Everything's exactly right there. So Moses can simply influence the Egyptians, or he thinks he's going to deliver the Hebrews. No, he ends up for 40 years being nobody. Isn't that amazing how this is all a part of this plan of God? And the strange thing is that the Hebrews are suffering all during those 40 years. In God's plan and preparation, it wasn't yet time. It wasn't yet time. So we've got this really interesting story going on. And that's the end of Moses' story. Murderer, failure, coward who could never be used by God. Oh, what an odd thing that's like so many of the stories in the Old Testament. So as a part of this God's salvation story is making us see the grace that God extends. And it's astonishing that God would have chosen Moses because he's a murderer. You would never think that God would choose Moses. Again, it's all grace. 40 years passed. So Abraham, 25 years passed. Joseph, I think, what is it, 15 years passed? 20 years? I can't remember. I knew last week. A lot of years passed for Joseph. Moses, 40 years passed. So here is a part of the salvation story that does a couple of things. First of all, this salvation story shows us that God's time is not our time, right? Secondly, the salvation story shows us that God always fulfills his promises, but he takes his time in doing it according to his purposes. And thirdly, we see that there is hardship and suffering and humiliation and brokenness that happens during those long periods of waiting, whether it's Abraham, whether it's Joseph, or whether it's now Moses. And now God's plan is ready. So the God of Abraham appears to Moses in a burning bush. And honestly, the whole Exodus story, start to finish, Exodus chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through, the whole Exodus story is filled with commentary that explains so much. And there's going to be so much explanation in this part of the story. So the God of Abraham appeared to Moses in a burning bush. He told Moses that he's going to rescue the Hebrews and bring them to the land of the Canaanites. And God says, now I'm sending you to the king of Egypt so that you can lead my people out of his country. All right. Moses is like, well, who am I? I can't do this. He was a perfect representative 40 years ago. He's the Prince of Egypt. God should have appeared to him then. I mean, from our vantage point, when a person's at his political influence, that's when we want to use the person. God's like, no, I don't want to use him then. I want to use somebody who's a murderer, a failure, a coward, somebody who could never be used by me. I'm going to use him. So he uses a shepherd who's nobody, David. He uses a man who's 75 years old. His wife is 65 years old. He's going to use them to start a new nation. Too old. So again, the salvation story isn't just that the seed gets passed from generation to generation. It also is a demonstration of how God works. And the commentary in the story and the commentary later on in the Psalms and the prophets, they really tell us what that story means. Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? Of course, from a practical point of view, this really makes sense because there were so many gods as far as the Israelites were concerned. The Hebrews had just like all kinds of gods. They had Canaanite gods. They had that they had been secretly worshiping when they lived with their father Isaac, Jacob. They even had gods from, of course, they had Egyptian gods, and they probably also had gods from where they originally came. And so they've got lots of gods. You know, they're worshiping lots of gods. So they want to know what his name is because, well, which of the gods? I've got all these gods up here. Which one is it? This one, or is it this one, or is it this one? And so God's answer is astonishing. I am who I am. This is what you were to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. That's astonishing. God also said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. Now, I said that the story isn't just the story of the passing on of the sea. The story is also the commentary on that. It's the word of God that tells us the meaning of the story. This is the meaning of the story. I am who I am. This is the meaning of the story. And this, what God says here in the story, tells us so much about what God is like. And it tells us so much about the God who's rescuing Israel. And so the commentary is amazing. This God is so different. He is who he is. Nobody can make him anything different. See, if you get a God of the mountains, then you always want to fight the people who have a God of the mountains. You always want to fight them on the plains, in the valleys, because the God of the mountains is he's powerful in the mountains, but he's not powerful in the valleys. If you have a God of day, then you want to do your battles at night, because the God of day has no power over the night. See, so the deal is that the way they're thinking, they want to know what his name is. They want to know what his job is. They want to know where his region is. They want to know what his nature is, because they have to be able to figure out how to use him to their advantage. God says, I am who I am. Bus. Tell them I am has sent you. And so right away we have this enormous theological statement, which is just like breathtaking. I am. And God's name is Yahweh. We really don't know how to pronounce it. I had a professor in my doctoral program who said it might be Yahoo. Means he is or he will be. It's the most common. I mean, just do a search for that. Go to BibleWebApp.com and do a search on the name Lord, Lord, capital O-R-D, like that, written like that, and do a search for it, and you'll just discover it's like over 4,000 times that this name appears. Elohim appears way fewer times. So this is like the name for God, the most common name for God. Sometimes you see Jehovah, and that's also in your Bibles, I think, but it's Yahweh. It's the same thing. It's based on, it's not like a different Hebrew word. It's Yahweh. And they say Jehovah because it was a misunderstanding of how that worked together. Your Hebrew scholars already know that. Jews in Jesus' day didn't say Yahweh, but they said Adonai. And that's why our Bibles say Lord. Adonai is the Hebrew, Kurios. So they would say, the Greek-speaking Hebrews would say Kurios. The Hebrew-speaking Hebrews would say Adonai. And you Hebrew students know that, and you Greek students know that. And they didn't say Yahweh because they were starting to think that the name was too holy. However, Abraham used that name. Isaac used that name. Jacob used that name. David used that name. The prophets all used the name Yahweh. All of them said Yahweh, 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 all the time. Christians these days, there's some Christians who are saying, oh, the name of God is too holy, especially Messianic Christians. They're saying, oh, the name of God is too holy, so we just have to say Adonai. No. They won't even write the name God sometimes. They just write G space D. No. His name is Yahweh. It's not bad to say his name. It's not unholy to say his name, especially for us, because we belong to him. Yeah, and so when the New Testament says Jesus is Lord, they're saying Jesus is Yahweh. Bus. They're saying Jesus is Yahweh. Easy to prove, different part of the course. So why does God call himself I am? He is who he is. We must come to him as he is, not as we'd like him to be. God does things we don't understand because he is who he is and he does what he does. Super important in this story of Exodus. He does what he wants to do. He doesn't do what, I mean, we think, oh, well, Moses is the prince of Egypt. Let's use him while he has influence. No, God does what he does. Oh, well, God's not going to use Moses now because Moses is a murderer. No, God is who he is. He does what he does. See, he does things we don't understand. And that's very clear in the story. All through the story, it's very clear. And it just continues on that way. People make idols, and I'm not going to talk today about idols, idolatry. I will talk about idolatry in the salvation story series, but not today. But we can't see and we can't touch the I am who I am. If you have an idol, you bring the idol with you places. But I am who I am. What do? He is who he is. He does what he does. He chooses. It's not like, oh, well, if I give him this much, then he'll do that for me. It's not like that at all. Some people have this attitude of you have to give to God in order to get from God. Not Yahweh. There is nothing you can give him that he doesn't already have. And there's nothing you can get from him unless it's according to his plan. Bus. And it's really important. God is not nice. I'm sorry, that word nice in Pakistan doesn't mean the same thing as it does in America. In America, the word nice means sweet, pleasant, friendly. God is not sweet, pleasant, and friendly. He is who he is. I mean, look at the fire in that burning bush there. That's a great illustration of God. He is utterly holy in a way that we can't understand, but also in a way we cannot stand in his presence. We can't get near him. We can't put our arms around him, right? Because he's burning fire. And it's really incredibly good news that we don't have a God that we can control because we're idiots. And we do things to give ourselves own pleasure. If God were just like, oh, well, God, give me this. Give me this. I'm going to say this special formula. When I say this, you'll give me what I want. Oh, my word. Can you imagine how bad that would be for us? If you just had to say the right words and you get whatever you want. Oh, my word, that'd be awful. Because we're a bunch of idiots. We want the wrong things. So it's really good news that he is who he is. That's the way we want it. In the story, the God who he is about to do many things with which almost everyone is not going to like very much. Yeah. He's going to send Moses to Pharaoh. Moses is not going to like that. He's going to make the Egyptians hate the Hebrews even more. And that's what happens, right? They make him do even more work. He's going to allow Pharaoh's magicians to imitate his miracles. He's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. His miracles are going to make the lives of Hebrews even worse for a while, right? Because they make him do more work. He's going to send terrible punishments on Egypt for how they've treated the Egyptians, or the Hebrews, I'm sorry. And the Egyptians are not going to like that. He's going to prepare to send the Hebrews to punish the Canaanites. Canaanites are not going to like that. The God who is I am who I am is going to send a man who is a poor speaker, a murderer, and a failure to speak to Pharaoh. Moses doesn't yet know what it means that God is the I am who I am. He says, please, Lord, I've never been eloquent either in the past or recently or since you've been speaking to your servant because I am slow and hesitant in speech. Now, this actually happened in real life, but I do want to point out, yeah, it happened in real life, but I want you to notice the fact that Moses records it. Listen, this is commentary. Moses said probably 1,000 things to God in this encounter. This is one of the few things that we have recorded. Why? Because it's commentary. It happened, and Moses recorded it because God wants us to know that God deals with people who are not eloquent. They are slow and hesitant in speech, and God deals with those people. He uses those people. God's heroes are not like human heroes. That's a part of the commentary, that these words are included. Didn't have to say that. He could have just, the story happened and Aaron goes with Moses, and we're like, okay, well, Aaron does the speaking. Okay, well, I don't know why, but God wants to make sure that we know by the words that are spoken, it's because Moses is not a good speaker and doesn't want to go. And then here's in more commentary, Yahweh says to him, who made the human mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, Yahweh? Now go, I will help you speak and I'll teach you what to say. Now, again, Moses, this really happened. God really said this to Moses, but God probably said 1,000 things to Moses. We have these words recorded. Why? Because God wants us to understand in the word part. Remember the revelation through the word part of the salvation story. Remember Ismail's article that we read and loved. The revelation of the word tells us commentary, right? It gives us commentary on Moses. It gives us commentary on God. It gives us commentary on what's happening. Why? The reason is because God wants Israel to know, and all of the readers to know in the story, that he takes simple things and he uses them in amazing ways. Why? Because he's the one who created the mouth. He's the one who makes mute or deaf, seeing or blind. And he takes common vessels and uses them. It's a part of the salvation story, not because we see it, but because we read it. You go, wow, that's amazing. And so the theology that's surrounding this salvation story is instructional. It teaches the Israelites and all of the readers, including Christians. It teaches those who read who God is, what God is like, why God works, why does God choose Moses. All of these things are all a part of the theology of the story, and that's also revelation. The event, the passing of the seed from one generation to the next, the delivering of the Hebrews from Egypt, and then the theology behind it. Not the theology we read into it, the theology that we read from it, that's written there. But we keep on expecting God to send someone else to rescue those who are slaves. Moses said, please, Lord, send someone else. Moses had lots of reasons. Egyptians a powerful nation. Maybe he was afraid because he was a murderer. Egypt had hundreds of powerful gods, and Moses doesn't know yet that Yahweh is the only true God. He doesn't know that yet. He will, but not yet. Moses is not skilled enough to speak. He's a failure, useless, unskilled, and unworthy. Why couldn't God see this? Of course, God could see it, but Moses gives him these arguments that he shouldn't be speaking. And again, this side of the story, Moses did not have to write down the fact that he did not want to go because he's afraid. He didn't have to write that down. And he did, which means this part of the salvation story is a key to understanding how God works. This revelation tells us how God works with people because Moses actually wrote down his arguments of why he shouldn't do it. Doesn't matter how weak we are, how much we have failed. It only matters that the one who calls us is the God who is who he is. Well, the Israelites are reading this now in the book of Exodus when Moses wrote it. And as the Israelites read this, the Hebrews are in the wilderness, right? And they're going to be conquering the land of Canaan. And it says, oh, yeah, we're weak. We don't have chariots. We don't have great swords. We don't have amazing spears. We're not warriors. Doesn't matter. God's going with us. You see, the commentary in the story tells us how we should look at what's about to happen. So when Moses went to Pharaoh, it was a battle between Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the God who is who he is. Now, this is not because I'm saying it. It's not because I observed it. It's in the story. Look at the story. It's not a battle between Moses and Pharaoh. Pharaoh does not say, I will not listen to you because you are nobodies, which is true. They were nobodies. They were Hebrew slaves, but that's not why. Pharaoh responded, who is Yahweh? Now that's what happened. I want you to notice that the commentary is telling us this is a battle between Pharaoh and Yahweh, not between Pharaoh and Moses. This is not Moses fighting against Pharaoh. This is Pharaoh fighting against Yahweh. Who is Yahweh that I should obey him? I don't know anything about Yahweh. So God calls us into impossible situations, makes us helpless so we can see him as the God who is. And then God says, I am Yahweh. I'll tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I am telling you. Moses says Pharaoh's not going to listen, but it's okay. He's still a deliverer. God had a plan. So the Lord answered Moses, see, I've made you like God to Pharaoh. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? So there's theology there, isn't there? And Aaron, your brother, will be your prophet. You must say whatever I command you. Then Aaron, your brother, must declare to Pharaoh that he will let the Israelites go from this land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart. I'm not going to talk about the theology of this, the hardening of the heart. But you need to see that it's there, okay? Don't deny that God hardened Pharaoh's hearts. Christians all the time making up excuses for God. Oh, well, he didn't really harden his heart. Whatever. It says it. Get coffee head. The revelation is all we need. And so that revelation is an incredibly important part of the story. God is allowing Pharaoh to be who he really is in the depths of his being. And God's going to let Pharaoh destroy his nation and his people to teach Pharaoh that God is who he is. And also to teach the Hebrews who are watching what God does. Now, here's God's plan, all right? Pharaoh's not going to listen. He's just not going to listen to him. God already knows that. Now, God could have just slayed all the Egyptians, and he didn't do that. He could have done that. That's what I would have done easily. You know, Moses gets there on Monday. All the Egyptians are dead on Tuesday, and the Hebrews leave the land on Wednesday. That's what I would have done. But God doesn't do that. Instead, what he does is he punishes the Egyptians, but he leaves them mostly alive because he wants them to see his glory. See, the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I stretch out my hand against Egypt. This is about God showing them who he is. So God's plan is not that Moses is going to convince Pharaoh, right? Can we remember this for the rest of our lives? This is theology. God's plan is that he would convince Pharaoh. This is these verses we just looked at. He's going to harden. Pharaoh's not going to listen. And then Pharaoh will know that he's Yahweh when Yahweh stretches out his hand against Egypt. God, Yahweh's the one who's going to convince. It's not Moses. It's not, well, we don't need Moses to be strong in speech after all, do we? We don't need him to be a great speaker because it doesn't matter. Because it's not Moses convincing anybody, let my people go. It's God convincing, right? And if Moses had convinced them, the Egyptians would never have learned who Yahweh is. The Hebrews would never have learned who Yahweh is. Moses wouldn't have learned who Yahweh is. If Moses had been an amazing speaker and he comes in and he does this amazing job, he just speaks with, and he does these amazing miracles, everybody's going, wow, he's right. We got to let those people go. He's right. He convinced me. No, this has to be God who convinces. It has to be God who shows them that God and Pharaoh, if there's a battle between God and Pharaoh, God wins and Pharaoh loses. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So now God brings 10 very terrible punishments on Egypt. First punishment, turning water into blood, but it seems like a failure because Pharaoh's magicians are able to do the same thing. And you go, why is God allowing Satan to copy his miracles? Because Satan has to ask permission for everything he does, right? Job chapter 1 and 2 show us that. They copy, so Pharaoh doesn't listen. So you think it's a failure. So Moses turns the Nile into blood, and then Pharaoh's magicians do the same thing. You're like, oh my gosh, that's a failure. No, it's not a failure at all. And then God seems to allow many seeming failures to harden Pharaoh's heart. He sends a Hebrew. The Hebrew confronted Pharaoh. A lowly Hebrew commanded Pharaoh to obey. Lowly Hebrew performed miracles. Then God allowed Satan to copy those miracles. All of this is hardening Pharaoh's heart. I mean, They're slaves. Pharaoh hates them. All Egyptians hate the Hebrews. It's like, what on earth is this all about? Pharaoh could not, he could have repented at any moment, but he didn't because he's proud. Of course he's proud. Well, you understand that. This is an honor shame thing. I mean, wouldn't that be shameful for the king of Egypt to submit to a bunch of slaves? Oh my gosh, that would be like the most shaming thing you could do. Like, all his whole family would be disgraced by that, right? I mean, oh my gosh. So already Pharaoh's, he's in deep trouble because in the end, he's going to have to shame himself before the Hebrew slaves. He has to. He has no choice. It's not a good day. Just a very bad day. He's just way too proud. So the Hebrews are thinking this is not working at all. And the I Am has a different plan for the Hebrews. He needs them to know who God really is. And he says that. If you read it, you'll see that he says, so that they may know, so that they may know. His plan is the Hebrews will know who he is. They need to know that because they're going to be invading Canaan. And somehow the Hebrews have to understand that they can invade Canaan. They can defeat the Canaanites. Why? Well, it's just like when Moses went to Pharaoh. Moses was weak, not a good speaker, and yet God convinced Pharaoh through miracles to let the people go. In exactly the same way, they can go to Canaan and they will be able to defeat their enemies. Why? Well, because God will do it. It's not the Canaanite, it's not the, well, not the Canaanites, it's not the Israelites, it's not them, it's God. Remember, he's also judging Egypt. So this plan is actually perfect, but it looks like it's failing. So then God brings them to desperation. He's got to bring Pharaoh to the point where Pharaoh can't stand it anymore. So he does all these punishments, starting with the millions of frogs, and they copied this second punishment. They couldn't stop the frogs from coming, and Pharaoh has to humble himself to ask Moses to stop the frogs, which Moses does. And then every punishment was a training program for Moses, for the Hebrews, for Pharaoh, and for the Egyptians. God had to train Moses, who saw himself as useless, that the God who he is can use useless people. That's already been written into the story. We've read it in the story. Who is the one who made the mouth? Remember? And so God had to train the Hebrew slaves, the bottom of society, that God is who he is, and that the idols of Egypt were powerless against him. God had to train Pharaoh that there is a king, the I am who I am, and the divine king rules over Pharaoh. God had to train the Egyptians that the I am who I am punished those who treated others unjustly. Punishments become worse and worse. It just gets horrible. Cattle die. This terrible sickness. There's darkness. There's hail. There's these locusts that eat everything up. That wasn't darkness. That was the hail. And there's the darkness over there. And God's showing that he is who he is. So Moses, the Hebrews, and even Pharaoh can believe. He's really doing this so they can believe. He's really grace. He's giving Egypt the opportunity to believe, but they won't. In the end, he's going to punish them for what they did to the Hebrew slaves, both physically by beating them and making them work so horribly, and secondly, by killing their baby boys. He's going to punish them for that. His punishment is going to be totally just and fair. So all of these plagues that are happening is exactly what the Egyptians deserve because of what they did. All right, so that's obvious. But at the same time, he's giving them the opportunity because it is obviously clearly beyond any shadow of a doubt. It's God who's doing it. It's the God that sent Moses. He's the one who's doing it. So they should be like, oh, I guess we better stop. And they don't. Every single time Pharaoh gives in, says that they can go worship God, but Pharaoh still didn't believe. Every time he changes his mind. So now the story takes this really interesting turn, and there's tons of commentary about this part of it, the Passover. Not just in Exodus, it is in Exodus. Tons of commentary in Exodus about what's happening, why it's happening. But then tons of commentary about this also in the Psalms and in the prophets and in the New Testament. And they need to learn that a sacrifice must be made to set the Hebrews free from sin. So God is making it so it's impossible to get out until the sacrifice is made. And that sacrifice, again, none of the terrible punishments could deliver them. The real deliverance would come, the sacrifice called the Passover. Since biblical theology includes both the events and what the word says about the events, there are many words about the Exodus. It's mentioned in the prophets, Psalms. Exodus is the most important event. New Testament also focuses on the Exodus. Jesus Christ is called the Passover in 1 Corinthians. Jesus Christ is the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world, the Gospel of John, chapter 1. And many, many, many good scholars see the theme of the Exodus as key to the Old Testament. Key. So we've got this Exodus going on, and we get an immediate direct tie-in with Jesus Christ in the Exodus, with that blood, and the fact that Jesus is crucified on the Passover, right? He's crucified on the Passover. And then on top of that, he's called the Passover by Paul. And on top of that, Jesus says, this is the new covenant, which is in my blood, as they are celebrating the Passover. So Jesus tells us, Paul tells us, John the Baptist tells us, the gospel writers tell us, the history tells us, everything tells us that the Passover is all about Jesus. And here we go with typology, which you're going to be reading about this week. Hopefully you've already read it. And we talk about typology. When we look at typology, here is profound typology, which the New Testament confirms as typology. And one of the things about typology that your article talks about is the fact it needs to be covenantal in nature. And this is certainly covenantal in nature. It's the Passover. I mean, how much more covenantal can you get than that? And it also needs to be something which is clearly pointed out in the New Testament as being, typology, which of course it is, and it points to Christ. And it's a part of great God's salvation story, which it so clearly is. We ourselves are surrounded by people who are like the Hebrew slaves. They're slaves to sin. They can't escape sin's bondage. Just like the Hebrews in Egypt, their deliverance seems impossible. You know lots and lots of people like this. People who are slaves to sin, either because of their religion or because of their actions, and they can't get out. And if the religion tells, well, you need to do more good works, well, that doesn't do any good. It doesn't undo what you've already done. You're still a slave. And you're never going to stop being a slave to sin. Everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. And we're surrounded by these people all around us. And we are all Moses, sent to Egypt to set free the slaves, but we don't understand who God is. And because the Exodus spends so much time explaining who God is in actual words of revelation, and then also in the story of what God does, those words speak to us to tell us that that's the way we need to look at our world around us. We also think the task is too much for us, and it is. We also are slow of speech and hesitant, and we are. We also think the task is dangerous, and it is. Pakistan. We are on the bottom, as was Moses, and think that no one will listen to us. And we think that, and we're right. So like Moses, we must learn to see who our God is. The I am who I am. In the Exodus story, God makes it clear. He says it verbally, remember? Verbal revelation, word revelation. He says verbally, it's not you, Moses, it's me. I made the mouth. It's me. I will show Pharaoh who I am. It's me. And we need to realize we're so afraid of being deliverers to bring people out of slavery to darkness into the light of Christ. We need to realize it's not us who does it. We're not the miracle workers, and we're not the Passover lamb. It's God and Jesus. And that's what's going on in the story. It's there in the story, and the commentary makes it very clear. It's written in words. Can we believe that the God who sent Moses to Pharaoh is the God who sends us to Pakistan? Can we believe that God wants to set our neighbors free? Can we believe that God can bring deliverance? Can we believe that God will do the miracles? Can we believe that our failures are not barriers, but proof that our being helpless and useless is all a part of the plan of the God who is who he is? So that's the overall story. That's the overall story. I mean, obviously there's a ton more, so much typology in that story. And Paul talks about some of that. He talks about the fact that Israel was baptized in the Red Sea. Wow. There's the typology there. Wow. That's just a lot to think about. And so we have all of these elements in the story where there's commentary that tells us so much about what we need to understand. I mean, if you were going to do your doctoral dissertation on Exodus, on the story of the Exodus and the commentary in the Exodus, you'd have to write like 10,000 pages. There's just like so many different comments about Exodus, the Exodus experience, in the prophets and the Psalms and the New Testament. The point then is that this great event in God's salvation story is directly tied to the New Testament. Because Jesus is crucified on the Passover. He's called the Passover Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. It's his new covenant in his blood. All of these things and many, 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 many more things tie Jesus Christ to the Passover. And so biblical theology, which is tracing the story of how we get from the fall in Eden, with the promise that God is going to crush Satan's head. And now we see that promise is being fulfilled with Moses being sent to Israel to deliver them from slavery, to bring them into the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a part of his covenant. Like, wow. So what's going on in the Exodus story is it is God's great salvation story. How does the seed pass to the next generation? Well, how do they get into the promised land? And when they get into the promised land, what's going to happen? Well, in the promised land, there's going to be the presence of God. There's also going to be the land of blessing. And so we're on our way to the fulfillment of the promise. But ironically, it isn't going to happen even when Pharaoh is a servant of Satan and he is crushed by God. The full fulfillment of that promise won't happen until Jesus Christ crushes Satan. Okay, so biblical theology, we're moving forward in the story. I hope that this will really encourage you and help you to recognize how this is all holding together with the word and also with the event.